Combine Plus. I'm Andrew Garda. I cover the NFC North for BleacherReport.com. With me today is Dan Pompei, who, of course, covers the Bears for the Chicago Tribune. How you doing, Dan? It's a little crazy this weekend, what with all the Honey Badgers and Manti Te'o and just all the nonsense that seems to be surrounding this particular draft.
Yeah, it has been, Andrew. Been a little bit of a carnival atmosphere, I think, over the weekend, but I think through it all, NFL teams are getting some good work done. They're figuring out who can do what, getting some good medical information, and also some good interviews. So I know it's been productive based on conversations I've had with a lot of front office people.
Well, looking at the Bears specifically, you know, we got Mark Trestman coming in. You guys are just kind of getting to know him a little bit. What are your thoughts on how he's going to approach this draft from an offensive standpoint? Of course, they brought him in to take Jay Cutler to the next level. They've got pieces. What do you think they need to add, and what do you think they will add in the upcoming draft?
Well, it's an interesting year for the Bears because they don't have a lot of cap space as of right now. They've got a number of their own free agents they have to worry about. Most importantly, I would think, are Henry Melton, the defensive tackle, and Lance Lewis, the guard. Of course, Brian Urlacher's contract is up. So you've got some big decisions to make there. Then you've got the offense that really has not been able to ascend to the next level, and that's why Lovie Smith is gone and Mark Trestman's here. I think his main responsibility is going to be to get more out of Jay Cutler, also to stabilize the offensive line. They'll probably make at least one major addition there, maybe two. But then they have to hope the defense doesn't fall apart. It's getting a little old, and as I said, they could have some player losses too. So it's an interesting transition year for the Bears.
Yeah, absolutely. Some talk I've seen today, and I believe one of your colleagues, Brad Biggs, had a piece about whether or not the Bears might be looking for adding a quarterback to back up Jay Cutler. And Jason Campbell didn't really work out the way they hoped that he would. And then on top of it, really, if things don't get better for the offense, at some point it comes down to Jay Cutler, so they may be looking to developmental quarterback a little bit later. Do you hear anything about them adding someone? Have you heard anyone they might be interested in?
Well, I would think they're going to look at quarterbacks, certainly. I wouldn't think they're going to try to bring in someone who's going to challenge Cutler. You know, he's in an interesting spot because he's got 1 year left on his contract, so the Bears could either extend him this year or they could let him play out the last year as the Ravens did with Joe Flacco. Of course, that worked to Flacco's advantage, but I think it's probably still a reasonable gamble for the Bears to make to let him go into the last year of his contract without re-signing him to an extension. But I would think certainly they would be looking at players in the draft, especially second-day guys, a guy you could bring in who you like, who you could develop, and who maybe fits Mark Trestman's system, and he could maybe be a guy for the future.
What about offensive line? And I'm sure that pretty much as a Bears writer, you get asked that question an awful lot. Do you think they go early on an offensive tackle? It doesn't seem like there's a lot of guys around 20 where they're going to be picking. Do you see a solution in the draft, or do you think they might go after someone in free agency to try and beef the offensive line up a little bit?
Well, I think one way or another they're going to add a starter, whether it's through free agency or the draft, depending on where they feel the best options are. As you mentioned, in the draft, you're looking at really three left tackles in Luke Joeckel, Eric Fisher, and Lane Johnson. In terms of guys who you feel could step in and start right away, they're probably all gone at number 20 where the Bears pick. So if you're looking for a left tackle, now you have to look in free agency. The options there might not be very enticing once teams get through with their tagging and their extensions and all that. So, it's possible. I wrote last week that Jamarcus Webb ends up this team's starting left tackle next year, but that still would not prohibit the Bears, I don't think, from going out and getting some offensive lineman who could come in and start, whether it's a right tackle or a guard.
Yeah, well, definitely there's some room, even if they keep Jamarcus Webb, who really, for a seventh-round guy, has come along over the last couple of years. There's definitely room to add some people, and you can never have too many offensive linemen. Moving to the other side of the ball, of course, the big story would be whether Brian Urlacher is coming back or not. Regardless, even if he comes back, even if he takes less money, they're still going to find someone for that middle linebacker, that inside linebacker position. And it's hard to replace Urlacher because it's not always just about production for him. It's about what he does in terms of being a strategic guy on the field. Do you feel like they're going to probably try and get a developmental guy in there early in the draft, or is this a thing where they may go, hey, let's bring Urlacher back, let's keep Nick Roach and Geno Hayes in, see if we can get these guys together and hold on for another year, and then put it off for another year, because really the defense in general is very solid and has been for several years.
I'll tell you what, Andrew. I think regardless of what happens with Urlacher, whether he is back in Chicago or whether he's not, the Bears need to draft a young middle linebacker, especially if the board breaks for them a certain way where one is available who they really like, because Urlacher at best at this point of his career is a short-term solution. So you need to be looking at young guys, and there's some good ones. Who knows with the way Manti Te'o's draft stock and Alec Ogletree's draft stock could be affected by what's going on with them over the last couple months. One or both of those guys could be there for the Bears at 20, and that would make for an interesting decision.
Yeah, another interesting decision to me is they've got Israel Adonijah as a free agent. You have Julius Peppers. They drafted Shea McClellan last year as a defensive end prospect, but he does have some linebacker skills. He did play that in school. Do you see that he could possibly move the linebacker, because they have a solid defensive line, especially if they bring Henry Melton back? They've got the defensive line. They've got plenty of ends. Do you see them possibly doing what Lovie Smith said he'd never do, which is move Shea McClellan back to more of his natural position at linebacker?
I don't see it happening this year, certainly not, and I really don't see it happening in the near future at all. I think they want him to play defensive end. They like his pass rush ability. I know the coaches think he can rush the passer with his hand down. I think there could be packages and situations where you stand him up. There were a few last year, but in terms of him being like a full-time, some people have said middle linebacker, I don't think that'll happen, and he wouldn't be an outside linebacker unless you switch to a 3-4, and that's not in the cards.
All right, switching back to the offensive side of the ball, there's been some talk about the Bears going for a tight end earlier. They've got a pretty solid group of wide receivers in Brandon Marshall, Alshon Jeffrey, if he can stay healthy, he's moving along, developing well, and Earl Bennett's pretty reliable. Do you see them attacking the tight end position early on, maybe go after a guy like Ertz or Eifert, who both did very well this weekend at the Combine, and possibly get themselves a little more athletic tight end, more in the vein of what you see with New England and even with like Jason Witten in Dallas, has been a very effective player in it, just stretching the field as well as going across the middle?
Well, I think if there's one thing that we've seen from Phil Emery, it's that he likes to add playmakers on offense. Having traded for Brandon Marshall, drafting Alshon Jeffrey last year. So I think he's going to try to add another one this year, and it makes sense to add one at that tight end position if you could find the right guy. Again, if the draft breaks a certain way, maybe one of those guys that you mentioned, Eifert or Ertz, could be a logical first-round pick for the Bears. They could address the position in free agency as well. Right now there are some guys with contracts scheduled to expire that could appeal to them. So I think that's a position they need to look at. I think they need to look at the wide receiver position too, because they really lacked a deep threat last year, a speed element, and where you get that guy, I'm not sure, but I think it's something they need to look at.
Do you think that they might be interested in looking at some of the free agent wide receivers that are out there? I mean, we're still very much up in the air in the early portion of, the postseason. Greg Jennings may be tagged, he may not be tagged. Dwayne Bowe may be tagged, he might not be tagged. You've got some guys out there who possibly could step in to a role and be that vertical threat. Do you see them going after another guy? Do you think that really they kind of blew their wad with Brandon Marshall last year, and now we're looking at a situation where they're not going to spend the big money on a guy and try and develop a little more from within?
Yeah, I think they could go after a free agent wide receiver. I don't think it'll be someone at the salary level of a Dwayne Bowe or a Mike Wallace or one of the top guys. Because I like you say, that it doesn't make sense to allocate that much money to the wide receiver position. They're already paying Brandon Marshall over $9 million a year. I think he's, I want to say he's the third highest paid guy in the team in terms of cap space. So you have to be careful of how you allocate your resources, and I don't think it makes too much sense to put that much into one position. They could find maybe a second-tier guy in free agency, though.
Well, we know we've got a lot of changes on the offense. What are your take on new defensive coordinator Mel Tucker? It seems like he's coming in and for the most part is pretty happy with just the way things are. Tweaking here and there, but it sounds like he wants to rely on the veterans a lot to help the transition. Does it seem like he's going to keep things mostly the way they are, or do we expect maybe a few changes as time goes on? Once he's got his feet wet.
I think, from a schematic standpoint, from a language standpoint, I think it's going to be pretty much status quo. But there'll be changes. He's not going to do things exactly the way that Rod Marinelli and Lovie Smith did before him. He sees the game a little bit differently, and I'm sure that he will implement his own changes. I think one of the things we might see with Tucker is he might not be or he might like these players to be a little more uncomfortable in terms of having seniority and having status and that sort of thing. And really, he doesn't know these guys, so they're all new to him. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a prove it mentality in training camp and even in the off season this year.
Well, it'd be good for the Bears to get fired up. I mean, complacency, especially in the NFC North, is a very dangerous thing. We've seen it bite the Detroit Lions in the rear end last year, and the Bears are close. This is a very tight division. Dan, everybody can find you, of course, at the Tribune and at Dan Pompei, Pompei on the Twitter. What else do you have going on? What else can we expect from you this week?
Also, you can follow my work at nationalfootballpost.com website, and I'll be working here from the Combine and providing some more draft articles and different stories as time goes by.
How did I forget National Football Post? One of my favorite websites, and all of it. Matt Bowen, all of you guys are over there. Actually, it seems to be like like it used to be that the Yankees used to get all of their prospects from the Oakland A's. It seems like the National Football Post takes a lot of you Chicago Tribune guys over there. It's a pretty good.
We do have a number of us, yes.
Yep, absolutely. Well, okay, this is Andrew Garda, NFC North lead writer from Bleacher Report. On behalf of Dan, myself, and the Google Plus people, I want to thank everyone for stopping by. You can check out everything with the Combine Plus hashtag for the rest of the week in Indianapolis as we cover the Combine. Thanks, guys.